Hannah's knees hit the ground with a sickening thud, the earth burning beneath her palms. Her father's hand wrenched at her hair, dragging her through the dust like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. The world was a blur of pain and sweat, but even through the haze she saw him, a stranger. He stood by the well, motionless. His gaze never faltered. He didn't turn away. He didn't pretend not to see. He just waited. "Let her go!" The stranger's voice cut through the air, as cold and certain as a bullet. Silas Mallister's grip tightened on Hannah's hair, his breath sour with whiskey. The world tilted as she was shoved forward, her hands scraping the cracked earth. She didn't cry out. She'd learned long ago that the only way to survive was to endure. The man didn't move. He didn't have to. His eyes were locked on her father, unwavering. Let her go. The stranger's words were calm, unshaken by the heat of the moment, as though he knew this fight was already over. Hannah's heart thundered in her chest, but a part of her knew this man, whoever he was, wasn't like the others. This wasn't just another stranger passing through. No, this was something else, something different. And for the first time in years, a flicker of hope ignited in her chest, fragile and fleeting. But Silas wasn't done. He jerked Hannah to her feet, his grip like iron. "You think you can hide from me, girl?" he spat, his voice thick with rage. The stranger stepped forward. The sun was blazing, but in that moment, the air seemed to crackle with the tension of what was about to unfold. "You want to keep hurting her?" The stranger's words were low, barely a whisper carried on the wind. "You do, and you won't leave here today. Let her go." Quote. Silas froze. A bead of sweat traced down his temple, his hand still gripping Hannah's wrist like a vice. The air thickened, and for a second, nothing moved. Not the wind, not the earth beneath their feet. "She's mine," Silas muttered, his voice barely a rasp. "She's always been mine." Quote. "You lost her the day you sold her soul to your grief," the stranger replied, his tone unwavering, like a man who knew the weight of the world and the cost of keeping the truth buried. Hannah's pulse raced as her father's eyes flicked between her and the man before her. His grip on her slackened just enough. The stranger's voice was firm, but not without a trace of something Hannah couldn't name. "I said, let her go." Quote. The silence hung heavy. A moment of truth suspended in time. And then it happened. Silas released her, his body stiff as he took a step back. His eyes burned with something Hannah couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe regret, but it was too late for that now. She stood there, trembling, dirt-streaked and bloodied, but free. The stranger took a step forward, his boots crunching in the dirt. "Come on," he said, his hand extending toward her, his eyes soft with something she hadn't seen in so long. Kindness. "We're leaving." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. The life she had known, the suffocating grip of her past was finally slipping away. She took a step toward him. One step, then another, until she was standing beside him, her heart hammering, her eyes locked on her father's retreating figure. And as they walked away from the shack that had been her prison for so many years, Hannah felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. For the first time in 17 years, she felt the weight of hope. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land as Hannah and Samuel walked away from the shack. Her body ached, each step sending sharp pain through her ribs, but she didn't stop. The cool evening air felt like freedom as it washed over her, lifting some of the weight from her shoulders. Silas was a distant figure now, barely a speck in the horizon, his whiskey-soaked anger slowly fading into the desert dust. But the years of fear, the years of violence, still clung to her like a second skin. She wasn't sure how to leave it behind. Samuel's footsteps were steady beside her, and though he didn't speak, she could feel his presence like an anchor in a world that had always felt like a storm. "You're going to be all right," Samuel said after a long stretch of silence. His voice was rough yet kind, and there was something in it, something that made her believe him. Hannah gave a small nod, but the words stuck in her throat. She didn't feel all right. She felt broken, torn, lost. But there was a part of her, just a small part, that wanted to believe in what he said. She stopped herself, unsure of what to ask, what to say. There was too much pain that needed to be sorted through. She couldn't even begin to voice it. "It's all right," Samuel said, his gaze forward, as if he knew she needed the space to breathe, to think. "You don't have to talk about it yet." Quote, Hannah felt a brief flicker of gratitude. He wasn't pushing her. For the first time in her life, someone wasn't demanding she speak when she wasn't ready. It was a strange comfort, and it made the air feel just a little easier to breathe. They walked for what seemed like hours, the land stretching endlessly before them, barren and beautiful in its harshness. Every now and then Samuel glanced over at her, his eyes searching her face, but he didn't ask, didn't press. Eventually, they reached the small creek Samuel had been heading toward. The sound of running water was a balm to Hannah's ears, so simple, so peaceful, and yet it was a sound she hadn't heard in years. She knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink, and let the coolness fill her dry throat. Samuel watched her for a moment, then took off his boots and waded into the water. The creek was shallow, the water flowing over smooth rocks, but it felt like the most refreshing thing Hannah had ever encountered. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the night settle around her. When she opened her eyes, Samuel was sitting across from her on the bank, his hands resting on his knees. There was a tiredness in his eyes, an unspoken weight that he carried, but there was also something else. A calm, a quiet steadiness that Hannah couldn't help but admire. He wasn't looking at her like she was broken. He wasn't seeing her as a victim. He was simply waiting for her to heal in her own time. Hannah found herself studying him. His face was weathered, the lines of grief and experience etched deep into his skin, but there was a gentleness in him that didn't match the rugged exterior. His hair was dark and unruly, his beard unkempt, but there was something about him that felt familiar, like he had lived through storms but was still here. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice thick with the emotion she had yet to release. It wasn't much, but it was all she could offer in that moment. Samuel looked at her and nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "No need to thank me. You didn't ask for saving. But sometimes things happen the way they do, and we just have to ride with it." Quote. Hannah nodded, her eyes drifting toward the setting sun. The sky was a canvas of pinks and oranges, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. It felt surreal, the idea that she was here, that she was walking away from everything she had known. It was freedom, but it was also terrifying. "Where are we going?" she asked, breaking the silence. "What now?" Quote. Samuel stood and walked over to his horse, giving it a reassuring pat. "There's a ranch a few miles east of here. It's not much, but there's water. I can't promise you a palace, but it's a roof over your head." Hannah watched him for a moment, his calm presence somehow steadying her nerves. "I don't need a palace," she said, standing up slowly. "I just need something different." The words surprised her, but they were true. For the first time in her life, she wasn't seeking approval or love or some form of validation. She was just seeking a life where she could breathe, where she could exist without the constant fear of being torn apart. Samuel mounted his horse and extended his hand to her. "You coming?" Quote. Hannah hesitated for a heartbeat before she took his hand. His grip was firm, steady, as he helped her up onto the horse behind him. As they rode off into the night, the world around them quiet. The only sounds were the soft thud of hooves and the gentle rush of the creek behind them. They rode for hours, the night growing colder as they moved further from Dusty Creek, from the past that had nearly destroyed her. And for the first time in so long, Hannah felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it wasn't much. Maybe it wasn't the life she had imagined for herself. But as they rode into the darkness, side by side, it felt like a beginning. The moon hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the land as Samuel guided the horse through the night. The sound of hooves was a steady rhythm beneath them, the only noise in the vast, empty desert. Hannah clung to Samuel's back, her body pressed against his, the wind tugging at her hair. She didn't mind it. She didn't mind anything, as long as it meant leaving behind the shack, the house that had been her prison for so long. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She wasn't listening for Silas's footsteps or fearing his angry voice. The past was still there, like a dark cloud she couldn't shake, but for the first time, it felt distant, like something that happened to someone else. Samuel's steady hands guided the reins, but his mind, she knew, was elsewhere. She could feel the tension in his body, the way his muscles tightened every time a gust of wind blew across the plains. He wasn't just a stranger anymore. He was something else, something she couldn't quite put into words. She wanted to say something, anything to break the silence between them. She wanted to ask him where he was taking her, what this strange journey was meant to lead to. But every time she opened her mouth, the words felt wrong. Too big, too heavy. So instead, she said nothing. She just held on, trying to steady her breathing, trying to keep the darkness of her past from creeping in. They stopped only when the horses were tired, their sides heaving, sweat mingling with the dust of the trail. Samuel didn't say anything as he dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He moved with purpose, checking the horses, checking the surroundings, always alert. Hannah slid off the horse, her legs unsteady beneath her. She had spent so long running on adrenaline that now, with the quiet of the desert settling around them, her body seemed to remember all the aches and pains she had ignored. Her ribs ached with every breath, and her bruises, though less visible, were still raw under her skin. Samuel turned toward her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You should rest. We'll set up camp here for the night. I'll keep watch." Hannah nodded, but her gaze lingered on him. There was something in the way he moved, something in the way he carried himself that spoke of pain and loss, of battles fought that had nothing to do with the men who pursued them. He wasn't just protecting her from the dangers of the desert. He was protecting something inside himself, something she didn't understand. She crouched beside the fire Samuel had quickly built, the crackling flames casting dancing shadows across the sand. She watched him for a moment as he worked, his back turned toward her, his face obscured in the dim light. There was a stillness to him now, a calm that wasn't just from his rugged demeanor but from the quiet way he carried his grief. It wasn't something loud or violent. It was a quiet storm that seemed to roll just beneath the surface, as if it had been there for years, building and building. "Why did you help me?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking the silence between them like a gunshot in the dark. "You didn't have to." Samuel didn't turn to look at her right away. Instead, he stared into the fire, his eyes shadowed by the flickering light. His fingers worked methodically as he adjusted the logs, but there was a tension in the way he moved. "You were in pain," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I couldn't just walk away." Hannah bit her lip, unsure of what to say. He couldn't possibly understand her pain. He couldn't know what it was like to live under the weight of constant fear, of violence and hatred. But there was something in his voice, something in the way he said it, that made her believe he understood more than he let on. "I don't understand you," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "You don't even know me. Why take me with you? Why bother?" Quote. Samuel's hand stilled for a moment, and for the first time he turned to look at her. His eyes were intense, dark, like a storm was gathering just behind them. "I've seen what happens when people turn away," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've seen people broken, and I've seen what it does to them. I didn't want to leave you like that, alone, not after everything you've been through." His words hit her like a wave crashing over a cliff. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. She wanted to tell him that he didn't have to save her, that she wasn't broken, but the truth was, she was. She had been for so long. And the way he spoke, like he understood what it felt like to be lost, made something inside her stir. "Why do you keep fighting?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. "Why do you keep going after all this time?" Quote. Samuel looked away, his eyes darkening as if the question dredged up memories he wasn't ready to confront. "Because if I stop, I'll be lost too," he said, his voice distant, like he was speaking to himself more than to her. "I've been running for so long, but now I found something worth stopping for." Hannah didn't know what to say to that. Her heart beat faster in her chest, a mixture of confusion and something else. Something that felt like warmth spreading inside her, like the fire they had built. "You're not running anymore," she said quietly, unsure of the words as they left her mouth. "You're not alone anymore." Samuel looked at her then, his eyes softening. For the first time, he didn't seem like the stranger who had come out of nowhere to save her. He seemed human, vulnerable, real. "Neither are you," he replied. The words hung in the air between them, and for the first time since they'd met, there was a quiet understanding. Samuel didn't have all the answers. He didn't have the power to change everything that had happened to her. But for the first time in her life, Hannah felt like she wasn't alone in this world, and that, maybe, was enough. The fire crackled, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything they hadn't said pressing down on them. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was shared, and for the first time, Hannah let herself believe it. Believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find peace. The morning came quietly, the world around them unchanged, but everything inside Hannah felt different. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting soft light across the barren land. They had ridden through the night, and though her body was exhausted, she didn't feel the weight of it quite as much as before. The night had given her something else, a sense of calm, a sense that for the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. The horses were tired, their bodies worn from the long ride, but Samuel didn't stop. He led them forward, moving with a determination that matched his quiet strength. Hannah rode beside him, her ribs aching with every movement, but she didn't mind. She was free. For now, that was enough. As they rode, the land began to change. The desert gave way to small hills, patches of scrub grass, and the distant silhouette of a few scattered trees. The heat of the day pressed down on them, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been in Dusty Creek. Here, in the open spaces, she felt like she could breathe again. "You doing all right?" Samuel's voice cut through the silence, bringing her back to the present. Hannah looked over at him. There was a concern in his eyes, but no pity. He wasn't looking at her like she was broken. He was looking at her like she mattered. "I'm fine," she replied, though the words didn't quite match the way her body felt. Still, she didn't mind. She was fine enough. Samuel nodded, but he didn't look convinced. "We'll stop soon," he said. "Let the horses rest." Hannah nodded, feeling the exhaustion in her bones, but she wasn't ready to stop yet. She had never been good at resting, not when there was always something to do, something to survive. But with Samuel beside her, she felt a strange peace, a quiet assurance that they could keep going, even when the world seemed to press down on them. The land stretched out before them, vast and empty, but there was something beautiful about it. The way the light hit the hills, the way the dust swirled in the wind. It was a harsh place, but it felt like it had its own rhythm, its own heartbeat, and for the first time, Hannah felt like she was part of it. They stopped when the sun was high in the sky, the heat of the day settling over them like a blanket. Samuel led the horses to a small patch of shade under a tree, the dry leaves rustling softly in the breeze. He dismounted and helped Hannah off the horse, his hands gentle despite his rough exterior. She felt a jolt of surprise at the tenderness in his touch. He had saved her. He had taken her away from everything she had known, and now he was helping her, making sure she was okay. He didn't have to. He could have left her behind. But he didn't. And that, more than anything, made her believe in the possibility of a future. They sat beneath the tree, the horses grazing nearby, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was silence between them. Not the kind of silence that suffocated, but the kind that settled into the space between them like a comfortable weight. "I don't know what's next," Hannah said after a while, breaking the quiet. Her voice felt rough, like she had to force the words out. Samuel turned to her, his face serious but not unkind. "No one does," he replied, "but we'll get there, one step at a time." She looked at him, his expression steady, his eyes focused on something far off in the distance. She couldn't help but wonder about him, about the things he had been through, the things he hadn't said. He had his own demons, his own pain, but he was still here, still fighting, still trying to make things right. And somehow, that made her want to keep fighting too. "Why didn't you kill him?" she asked suddenly, her words coming out before she could stop them. Samuel's gaze shifted to her, his expression unreadable for a moment. "Who?" Quote, "My father," she said, her throat tightening at the thought. "When you had the chance. Why didn't you just end it? He deserves it." Quote. Samuel's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening, but his voice remained steady. "Because killing him wouldn't bring you peace, and it wouldn't bring your mother back." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Hannah didn't know how to respond. She had spent so many years hating Silas, blaming him for everything that had happened. But now that he was gone, there was a void where all that anger used to be. And she didn't know how to fill it. "Did you ever think about killing him?" she asked, the words feeling like a confession as soon as they left her mouth. Samuel didn't answer right away. He looked down at the ground, his hands resting on his knees, his mind clearly elsewhere. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Every day," he said quietly. "But then I realized that if I did, I wouldn't be any better than he was." Hannah sat in silence, taking in his words. She had never thought about it that way. She had always seen revenge as a way to feel justice, to make the world right again. But Samuel was right. Killing her father wouldn't have brought her mother back. It wouldn't have fixed anything. "I don't know what to do now," she said, her voice small in the quiet. "I don't know how to move on." Samuel turned to her, his eyes soft but steady. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to keep going, one step at a time." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than she expected. She didn't have to know everything. She didn't have to fix it all at once. She just had to keep moving forward. "Yeah," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "One step at a time." The wind rustled the leaves of the tree, the only sound between them, but it was a peaceful kind of silence now. A silence where Hannah felt the weight of her past begin to lift, just a little, as the future stretched out before her. The day seemed to stretch on forever as they rode, the sun a relentless presence in the sky, beating down on them like an angry god. The air felt thick, dry, and unforgiving. But Hannah didn't mind. She had been through worse. She had survived worse. And right now, she had Samuel at her side, guiding her through it. That was all that mattered. They traveled through the afternoon, the land around them changing again, slowly giving way to more rolling hills and the occasional patch of sparse trees. The path they were on had become little more than a series of dirt trails, but Samuel knew where he was going. He always did. Hannah's thoughts were scattered, her mind drifting between the freedom she now felt and the weight of the past she was still carrying. Every time she thought about her mother, about the cookbook that had burned, a sharp ache hit her chest. She wanted to feel the peace she had been told would come after the storm. But it wasn't that simple. Not yet. After a few hours, they stopped near a small creek that ran through a narrow valley. The horses were tired, their legs shaking from the long ride. Samuel didn't waste any time. He immediately led them toward the water, letting them drink and rest for a moment. Hannah slid off her horse, feeling the familiar ache in her bones. She didn't protest when Samuel moved to prepare a small campfire. He was always moving, always doing something. And that, in its own way, was a comfort to her. As the fire crackled to life, the air seemed to cool slightly, though the heat still hung thick. Hannah sat by the fire, her eyes flicking between Samuel and the horizon. The sun was sinking lower, casting long shadows that stretched across the valley, painting the world in gold and crimson. "Do you ever think about your family?" Hannah asked suddenly, breaking the quiet that had settled between them. The question had been on her mind for a while, but she hadn't been sure how to ask it. She needed to know more about him, needed to understand the man who had saved her, the man who had shown her kindness when she had expected none. Samuel paused, his hands stilling as he worked to gather some dried wood. The air around them seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the question hanging between them like a weight. "Every day," he said quietly, his voice low, rough. "But it doesn't help. It never brings them back." Hannah nodded, her eyes downcast. She didn't need to say anything. She understood that kind of pain. It was a wound that time couldn't heal. She had lived with it for years. But with Samuel, there was something different. Something that made her believe that healing wasn't impossible. He sat down beside her, his posture relaxed, but there was a weariness to him that she hadn't seen before. The firelight flickered in his eyes, casting shadows across his face, but there was something else there too. Something softer. His voice was steady, but it held a quiet sadness that she hadn't noticed until now. "Tell me about your mother," he said suddenly, his tone gentle, as though he was asking for permission to dive into something painful. "I know she was important to you." Quote, Hannah felt a tightness in her throat, but she didn't hesitate. There was a weight in her chest, something heavy that had been building for years, and now, with Samuel beside her, she felt like it was finally safe to let it go. "My mama," she began, her voice soft. "She was the strongest woman I've ever known. Even when things were hard, when we didn't have enough food, or when Pa drank too much, she always made sure I knew I was loved. She always told me I was worth something, even when everyone else told me I wasn't." Her hands trembled as she reached for the fire, her fingers brushing against the warm stones. "She had this cookbook," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was everything to her. She would have made me pies, cakes, all the things she never got to. I used to dream about them, about how she would make things sweet like she always promised." Samuel said nothing, but the way he looked at her, softly, gently, was enough. He didn't press for more. He let her speak in her own time, when she was ready. "I never knew her as well as I should have," Hannah said, her throat tightening again. "I was just a kid. I was 5 when she died. But I remember how she used to smile when she looked at me. I remember how she'd hum when she cooked, how the house smelled like her, like home." Quote, She paused, drawing a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. And then after she was gone, I couldn't remember her the same way. It was like everything good in the world had been taken from me, and I was left with nothing but the pieces of her. And Pa, he wasn't the man he used to be after she died. He didn't know how to handle it. He turned to whiskey, to blame, and everything fell apart. The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. Samuel didn't speak, he just sat beside her, his presence a quiet anchor. "I spent so many years trying to survive," Hannah whispered, her voice breaking, "trying to be good enough for him, trying to make him love me again, but it was never enough. And now I don't know what to do with all this, with all the pain." Quote, Samuel turned toward her, his face serious, his eyes soft. "You don't have to do anything right now, Hannah," he said quietly. "You just have to be. The rest will come when it's ready." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time, and she saw something in his eyes, something that mirrored the pain she had carried for so long. He had lost his family, too. He had lived with grief. But he wasn't running anymore. He had found a reason to fight, to keep going. Maybe that was enough. Hannah felt something stir deep inside her, something unfamiliar, something like hope. She had been running her whole life, running from pain, from fear, from everything that had held her down. But maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to heal. The days passed slowly as they continued their journey, the distance between them and the past growing with each mile. The land had changed once again, from dry hills to grasslands that seemed to stretch forever. The horses were tired, but their spirits were higher now. The weight of constant danger lifted, if only for a little while. The quiet of the land felt different now, calmer, like the world had exhaled, like it was allowing them a moment of peace. Hannah had been quiet for days, but it wasn't the same silence that had haunted her for years. This silence was different. It was filled with the sound of the world turning, the steady rhythm of hooves, and the quiet conversations that had begun between her and Samuel. They had begun to share their stories, fragments of their lives that had once felt too heavy to speak aloud, but now, in the stillness of the land, they didn't seem so daunting. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of deep red and gold, they came upon a small cabin nestled in the valley. The smoke from the chimney rose in a lazy curl into the air, and the soft hum of evening life surrounded them. Samuel pulled the horses to a stop and looked at Hannah, his expression unreadable. "We're here," he said simply. Hannah looked at the cabin, her heart suddenly thumping in her chest. She had expected something different, something rougher, something more isolated. But this was different. This was a place that felt like it had roots, like it had a future. "Is this your ranch?" she asked, her voice low, unsure of how to feel. Samuel nodded. "It's not much, but it's mine. I bought it a few years ago after everything, after I had nothing left to hold on to." Hannah swallowed, feeling a mixture of emotions. This was the place he had fought for, the place that had brought him peace. But it wasn't just a ranch, it was a new beginning, and now she was part of it. As they dismounted and led the horses toward the barn, Hannah felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. This wasn't just a new place, it was a new life. And as much as she had wanted to escape her past, she realized that she was going to have to face it head-on if she wanted to move forward. Samuel moved with the ease of someone who had been here before, someone who had worked hard to build this place. He moved with purpose, checking the barn, feeding the horses, and preparing for the night. But when he looked at her, when their eyes met, there was a softness in his gaze, something that made her believe that here she could finally rest. Here she could start over. "I don't know what comes next," Hannah said quietly as she stood beside the barn watching Samuel work. "But I know I want to stay. I want to build something. I want to try." Samuel stopped for a moment, his hands stilling on the reins of one of the horses. He looked at her, his eyes dark but full of understanding. "You've already started," he said softly. "You're still here. That's the first step." Hannah smiled faintly, the weight of the last few weeks settling in her chest. The journey hadn't been easy. The road had been long and full of dangers. But she had survived. And she wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. The fire crackled as they sat beside it later that evening, the warmth from the flames wrapping around them like a blanket. The stars above were clearer here, shining brightly in the inky night sky, and the world felt vast, yet somehow small, as if everything had fallen into place. Samuel didn't speak at first, just watched the flames, his face illuminated in the flickering light. Finally, he turned to her, his expression serious. "Hannah," he began, his voice low, "I don't know if I'm the man you need me to be. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. But I know this. What happened in the past, what happened to us, it doesn't define who we are now. We get to choose who we are. We get to decide what happens next." Hannah's heart tightened at his words. She had spent so long believing that her past was the only thing that mattered, that the choices she had made, the things that had been done to her, would always haunt her. But maybe Samuel was right. Maybe they could start over. Maybe they could leave the past behind them and build something new, together. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw more than the man who had saved her. She saw someone who had lost everything, who had fought through the darkness and come out on the other side, someone who understood the weight of grief but had learned to keep moving forward. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said softly, her voice steady. "I just need you to be real, to be with me, to face whatever comes next, together." Samuel's lips curled into a small, tired smile. "I can do that." The silence between them was comfortable, like a promise made in the quiet of the night. There was no need for words anymore. The past was behind them. The future stretched out before them, uncertain but full of possibilities. For the first time in years, Hannah felt a sense of peace. She had spent so long running, so long fighting to survive. But now, she was ready to stop running, ready to build something new, something real. The fire burned low as they sat together, the sound of the night surrounding them. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel so frightening. And for the first time, Hannah felt like she wasn't alone. She was home. If you felt this tale in your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Archives of the Wild West, where every story rides through the dust, the danger, and the kind of love that never dies. See you in the next tale, partner.